And from ESD 112, myself, Catherine, and Christina Wombold are here.
Good morning.
From ESD 113, we have Andrew Hickman.
Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here, and I'll be with you all day. So excited to see you throughout the day.
He is holding down the fort for us today. From ESD 114, we have Susan Lathrop. I don't think Susan is with us. From ESD 121, Amber McCulloch. From ESD 123, Mike Esping. If any of you are here and I don't see you, please jump in. From ESD 171, we have Pete Phillips. Pete, you want to say hi? He's there somewhere. Jump in if you need to, Pete. And from ESD 189, Amy Colburn. So this is our group, and we are your contacts in your region for questions related to distance learning and LMS. And we are all have some expertise in this area, but we're also learning along with you. So please don't be afraid to ask questions, because nothing is going to sound like a silly question to us. We're here to help. So for this morning, the purpose of this session is to just help you get familiar with the features of Google Classroom. We want you to understand what the options are, what you can do, a little bit about how it works, but this is not a training session, not a how-to, and I think we were all kind of talking about this before you joined as participants. We all are used to teaching teachers and teaching administrators. It's very hard for us not to teach you how to use the tools. So forgive us. We're going to try to rein ourselves in. We love doing that. That's what we kind of live for. But this is really just an overview, and it's intended to give you the information you need to make a good decision about what LMS will work for your particular situation. And hopefully it'll give you just enough background to narrow things down and make a choice. If you joined us for the first session last week, we gave a very much 50,000-foot view of all of the LMS options that we're supporting in the state. And this one today, we're kind of narrowing in on individual LMS choices that you might make. So we're just going to give you kind of the overview of, excuse me, of Google Classroom today. A lot of you have seen this kind of a similar diagram to this before. If you were involved in any of Jeff Utek's Shifting Schools trainings, this is the graphic or similar graphic that he used to explain the concept of narrowing down your core 4 apps that you're going to use for online learning. The purpose of this is to ensure equity, to make sure everybody kind of has a similar experience, to keep our parents and our families engaged without confusing them any more than necessary, with all the many, many tools that are out there. And there are lots of tools. We are not going to try and sell you one tool or another. We all have different experiences and different preferences, but we just want to show you kind of what's out there. And for what we'll be talking about today, this is just an example, and I want to be very clear, you do not have to choose all 4 of these together. But if you're using Google Classroom, you're probably also using Google Drive for your file storage. You may be using Google Meet for your synchronous video. It's possible you could choose something different. You could choose Zoom, but Meet is built in and kind of coordinates with all the other Google stuff. And we also have put Screencastify here as your asynchronous video recording tool. Again, there are other choices. This is just one example. But what we're hoping you'll be able to do by the end of this day is make a choice on kind of what you want your core apps to be, to simplify things for your staff and for your families and parents and students. So we're going to try and compare what these LMSs do across the board. And there are quite a few things that they all have in common. They all do, on a basic level, the same stuff. But there are differences in how they do it. So one of the very basic functions that you want your learning management system to do for you is to create a course. With Google Classroom, you have a couple of options. Classes may be created centrally by IT staff, or maybe created by individual teachers. This would be a setting on the back end of your Google domain that people would set up for you. Students cannot create classes. There is an opportunity when you first access Google Classroom to state whether you are a teacher or a student in your domain. And if you say you're a student, you don't get to create classes, and only IT can make you a teacher at that point. So it's something, when you roll out this kind of an LMS, it's really good to get out ahead of it a little bit with some training and make sure your teachers know what they're going to see when they first access it if they've never touched it before. When I say consult with your IT department, that's kind of a theme that we have running through all of these. It's important that curriculum staff and administrative decision makers and IT all talk to each other, because sometimes we make a decision based on curriculum or strategic planning needs, but we kind of forget to bring the technology folks in. And there are things to consider, which we'll come back to later in this presentation, that it's really useful to bring them into. After your courses are created, there are different ways for students to join a course. Students can add students to courses themselves, or they can share an enrollment code there's a very simple process for students to join the class. You can see in that little screenshot there that I have a circle, and there's a little plus sign in there. And your plus sign allows you to join or create classes if you're a teacher, and it'll just say create if you're a student, or I'm sorry, just say join if you're a student. One of the kind of interesting features is that teachers can always join other teachers' classes in Google Classroom either as co-teachers. You can either add someone as a co-teacher who can then help you with everything in the class. They can see grades, they can post assignments, they can do everything but delete the class. Or a student can join or a teacher can join another teacher's class as a student and see what the students see, which is very useful. One of the things that I think a lot of us have found in doing online coursework is that it doesn't always look the same to us as the creators and administrators of the class as it does to students. And it's very important to know what students are seeing so that you can be sure you're giving clear directions if you're not giving them in person. And so there are some options there, some choices that you can make from the IT side and choices that your teachers can make.
And so, Catherine, I just wanted to double check. Is it a long process to get a bunch of students into a class, or is that something that I should coordinate with my tech team for, or should I lean towards doing it myself? What has your experience been?
My experience is that it's really easy to have students join with a join code. And I believe that you and I have both experienced down to second grade having students join the class themselves with no problems. I think sometimes we assume that younger students will have a very difficult time getting into systems like this and picking them up, and that has not been my experience personally. And my personal preference is to give students a join code. There are other ways to invite the students. If a teacher adds students, they are required to check their email to get the invitation. And there are some situations in which students do not have access to email in their Google domain. There are some situations in which kids just don't check email. That's kind of an old people thing. I hate to break it to you all, but email is for old people. We're the ones who are using it. And younger students really do not, I think, habitually just check email on any given day. So that's been a little bit of a speed bump for some groups. And like I said, there are also some ways for your IT staff to populate classes via your student information system. And some districts have chosen to go that route, so we just don't have to worry about it. But that is a very personal choice based on how your district works.
And Catherine, I wanted to add a comment in from what you said previously about adding other teachers. We actually had Catherine in the chat mention it's a great way to involve special education teachers, which we completely agree. We also recommend involving paraeducators. That way they can have access to the courses. And if you do involve multiple teachers, then you can actually share content across courses and collaborate that way too. So it helps in a number of ways, exactly like you were saying, but I wanted to recognize Catherine's comment in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, another thing that's actually kind of interesting that I've seen done is sometimes teachers have added their administrator, their observer, whoever is evaluating them as a co-teacher so they can see, or as a student so they can see what students are seeing. So again, all dependent on your personal situation, but a lot of flexibility there for a very simple tool. So the basic function that we're looking at with all of these LMSs is how do we share content with students? This is our home base. This is our organizational spot. This is where we all know to go to get our assignments and get our stuff, our materials. So how can we do that in Google Classroom? Google Classroom is set up to work very seamlessly with Google Drive files. And so obviously that's the easy one. We push a button, we can attach anything that's already in our Google Drive, a doc, a slideshow, anything that we are keeping in our Google Drive. But we can also upload directly from our desktop. Any other kind of a file, you can upload a Photoshop file or an MP4. Other file types are available to attach. You can also share Microsoft documents. There is an integration in Google that allows you to directly view and edit Microsoft documents in Google. So they do accommodate for that. You could upload iCloud if you're using the iWork suite or Pages, Numbers, any of those Apple software products. You could add documents from there. You can share a link from anywhere, any kind of a website, and you can directly add a YouTube video, which there's always a lot of discussion about how that should work and should you allow it and is it safe, and that's a whole, like, we could do an hour on just that, I think. But there are just a brief note on that. There are some administrative controls from the back side of the Google console that you can have your IT staff put into place to make sure that only appropriate and approved videos are available to students. And that's something to think about when you're instructing teachers on how they can use these tools. Do any of my colleagues have anything to jump in on this one? Because I know we've all experienced a lot of different stuff here.
I think with the sharing content, it's really kind of the world is your oyster kind of idea, where the idea is this is an easy way to push it out to students. And it's really thinking about the back end of why am I sharing the content versus the what, because it allows pretty much anything. So having great resources, having things that you want to share, having assignments, things like that is really what it's about.
I also found that the sharing, when Google Classroom was announced, it solved the problem of students having to share their document with their teacher. Before this, students would forget to share with their teacher, or they would remove their teacher from assignments. And this process just allowed everybody to be in it very simply, as well as I've seen kids down to kindergarten use Google Classroom to access links to other online resources, such as ABC Mouse or a YouTube video or other things. They may not be turning in content, but they're accessing content.
Yeah, I think that the world is your oyster is a good way to put it. There are almost unlimited options. And, because it is a Google product, you have some kind of more specific options with your Google Drive files that help you to manage how the assignments are coming back to you as a teacher. And when we do more specific training for teachers on how this works, we go over that and we talk about how to set up your assignments in such a way that you're getting the feedback and the data that you want. But there are a lot of options in sharing content with Google Classroom. Organizing the content in your classroom is also very flexible. And I've seen this done a lot of different ways. One of the very common questions that I have received as a Google trainer is, how should I organize my Google Classroom? And I don't answer that question. I kind of throw that back at people because Well, how do you want to organize it? It's going to work differently based on the population of students you have, the grade level, the number of different subjects or topics you teach. But what Google offers you is the opportunity to create topics within your classroom. So those are kind of like keywords or almost like a hashtag that aggregates assignments from a certain group. So if I want to put all my quizzes in one section, like you see in the screenshot there, I can tag all of my quizzes with the topic quiz. I can put a reading assignment with its own topic. I can sort it out in any way I like. And then within my classroom, I could sort those topics out by subject. Some elementary teachers choose to have a different classroom for each subject. So they'll have an English or ELA classroom and a math classroom and a science classroom. And within that, they organize the topics by unit of study. The possibilities are pretty much endless here as well, but there are some tools in there for you to sort that out. And then students can click on those topics that pop up on the side. If they know they're looking for a quiz, they can go click on a quiz and narrow it down and find what they're looking for.
Catherine, I'm seeing lots of talk in the chat about how many courses should I create? Is it hard to manage more than one content? Say I run 4 biology classes. Should I have 4 biology classes or just one? I did see somebody mark about clearing out the classroom. I don't recommend that personally because of the timeline. I recommend starting new and reusing posts from previous courses.
And you can do that. You can reuse a post that has been previously used. You can share content among courses. And you can have multiple sections of the same course by having a different classroom, but sharing the assignments, which makes it a little simpler if you teach multiple sections of the same course. Any other commentary on that one?
Yeah, and not only sharing assignments, but you can also share announcements, things like that. So if you post to the stream, you can post to all your classes at once. You can do things like that. It's a little more interesting with scheduling, but you can definitely reach all of them at once.
And I hesitate with that schedule because I never know when there's going to be a fire alarm.
Yeah.
Or when the class discussion is going to last longer. And when you schedule something to show up at 10:20, it shows up at 10:20, whether you want it to or not. Yeah. So I like to use the draft button and push it when I'm ready. I found that a lot of my students would access the material before I had given the instruction if I didn't hold it for that moment.
Yeah. Go ahead, Andrew.
There's a question in the chat, and this is a pretty simple one. I'm excited. How do you reuse a post from a previous course?
Well, Andrew, we're not supposed to be showing them how to do things today, and I'm trying to resist, but it's as simple as pushing a button. When you create an assignment, there is an option for you to reuse a post, and it's pretty simple. One of the things I want to mention before we go much farther with regard to organization is that you can see in the screenshot on this slide, it says stream, classwork, people. The stream or the classroom environment itself is organized in such a way that we have a stream, which is kind of like, I hate to use this analogy, but it's kind of like your Facebook feed, only it's actually chronological. It gives you the most recent things at the top, unless you pin something to the top or move it. So that's like a big flat list of everything that's there, which is why we like to have these topics available to sort things a little bit more. And in that stream, you also can give announcements to your class, which those are kind of like, I don't require a response, something I just want you all to know, like, don't forget to turn in your assignment tomorrow. Don't forget your permission slip for the field trip, assuming we're back in the world where we can do things like that and are using this in class. There is just an announcement and just a message to your class. Students can communicate with you through that interface a little bit if that's how you choose to have things work. And one other thing I want to note too is I think a lot of us have been with the Google Apps for Education kind of world for a long time. And we remember a time before Google Classroom existed. And we remember when Google Classroom was new and didn't have this level of organization, and it didn't have topics, and there were some things that we can do now that, I mean, it's really come a long way, and it's been interesting to watch the needs develop, things you didn't really realize you need that then show up and you go, I'm not sure how I survived without this before. So when you're thinking about the kind of LMS you're going to use, taking into account the experience that people have had already is a pretty useful thing to think about. So back to how we share the content. It's just a little bit more about how this looks. The built-in types of assignments in Google Classroom are assignment, quiz, or question. And an assignment is just anything that I want you to give me something back for that. Assignment could be, I would like you to read this chapter of the book and then mark it as done so I know you read it. It could be, I would like you to read a reading selection and answer these reflection questions or do an activity and turn that in digitally to me. It could be attaching a video that you're asking them to watch or an external tool that you're asking them to access. Anything that requires a response from students is an assignment. A quiz is a quiz, and it uses the Google Forms kind of interface if your people have used that before. It can be auto-graded for multiple choice or objective questions. And you can also ask a question, which is like a discussion board question that goes onto your stream, and students can see that, and you can decide what level of interaction you want is appropriate for your students. Do you want them to be able to reply to each other? Do you want them to be able to rethink and edit their question? You have a lot of options there as a teacher for managing and moderating that discussion, and some teachers choose not to have that level of discussion on the wall of their classroom at all, and some use it very extensively. I've seen it used very extensively in high school classes for discussion. When you add an assignment, you can have students editing a file that you have shared. You can have them create their own files right in Classroom, in the Classroom interface, and submit it, or they can submit a file that they've created previously of any type. Any type of file can be uploaded. We have seen music teachers have students do play testing, record their instrument, submit the audio or video file of that for grading. In fact, I know a teacher who does a digital music class who has students create their own music files, mix them down, and then submit the master to him for evaluation. There's all kinds of options here. Art classes, you can have Photoshop files, you can have anything else. So any kind of file is fair game for this. One of the features that is a little bit more recent in Classroom is that teachers can attach a rubric to an assignment. They can create kind of a library of rubrics and reuse them as desired. They can create a new one on the fly. And it's a pretty simple interface that's right there in the assignment creation window. And that when you attach a rubric to the assignment, then students have that rubric when they get the assignment so they can see how they're being graded, which is kind of a neat feature. Anybody have anything to pipe in about rubrics or file types here that I might have skipped over?
I really like the file type option because when students are using, say, an iPad and a teacher has a PC, we don't have this issue with can we access the files if we're using Google. Previously, we would have pages on the iPad and then the teachers with their PC couldn't open those page documents or they'd have to convert them. So having that really works out well. I'm also seeing a lot of chatter in the chat, kind of extra word there, about attendance and pieces. And Google Classroom will not take attendance for you, but you can set up polls, a little quiz or question where the student just marks. This worked very successfully for my daughter in her sophomore year English class. Every Tuesday she went in and she had a poll question. It was just like, what did you have for dinner last night? And that marked her attendance. Now, of course, I'd like it to be more academic, but it worked out well. And if the teacher had set up the assignments previously, she was very independent in her time without a live instructor.
Yeah, you can set things up as an entry or exit ticket, nothing high stakes, but something that just allows you to do some formative assessment as you go or have a check-in from students. So it can be very simple or it can be very complex, and it's completely up to you as the instructor. I'll also notice if you look at that screenshot that there's a little option there that says reuse post. So there's your ability to reuse a post, and it's that simple. I click plus create to create an assignment, and if I want to reuse one I've already done, I hit reuse post, I go find it, and it pops up.
There was one thing I wanted to add is differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
When you give an assignment, you can give it to 4 classes, the same assignment, or you can decide within one class, you only want to assign this assignment to 10 students. And then you make another assignment for another 10 students. Nobody sees those other assignments. So it's a really slick way of differentiating without having to post an A, B, C assignment.
Yeah, that really alleviates some confusion, because I'm sure we've all experienced if you give 3 assignments and you ask the students to choose the appropriate one, sometimes they're not going to notice the criteria and pick the right one. So we have, again, very wide range of options with the content we can share. Speaking of the discussions that you can facilitate, so this is that question option. Open-ended questions, multiple choice questions, whatever you want to do. And you can make those choices again as the instructor, whether you want them to talk to each other or edit what they've done. You can grade those responses or you can leave them ungraded. It's very flexible. This could be analogous to just an open discussion in the classroom, or it can be very specific and graded response. So as far as communicating with students, I kind of touched on this a moment ago. This is a tool that you could use, and one of the things that we would like people to consider while they're looking at all these LMS options is thinking about, we're not going to be distance learning forever, I hope. Hopefully, whether we choose to do hybrid or distance or any kind of combination or full distance this fall, whatever happens, whatever tools we're using now, we hope we bring them back into the classroom to help organize the students' and teachers' digital lives as they go. And Google Classroom, as you know, has been used for several years now very widely for in-class instruction. It's not just good for online only. So our communication pattern is going to be different if we're physically seeing students in our classroom every day, as opposed to they're at home and we don't see them. So you need to have options for how you're communicating. And it may be that you're using other tools outside of Google Classroom for that. That's going to be very dependent on your situation. But within Classroom, you can make announcements within the stream, which we just kind of mentioned. That's just a, hey, everybody, don't forget this kind of thing. Notifications that students will get in Google Classroom are kind of based on their settings. So if you're, depending on the device your students are using to access Classroom, they could conceivably turn off their notifications. And I don't think there's a way for us to stop them from doing that. Andrew, jump in, or Christy, if you know better than I do. But so that's, I mean, that's one of those things where we can't solve a classroom management problem with technology necessarily, but we can try to use our options to facilitate the communication. One of the things that Google Classroom will do is to automatically generate a calendar of assignments that goes with your classroom that appears in the Google Calendar interface. So if students have access to Google Calendar, they can look at those classroom assignments in a calendar format, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever works. And they can see attachments to the assignments. I love having students use Google Calendar. I mean, we all probably remember having paper planners and oh, it's 5 minutes before the bell. Don't forget to get your planner out. You know, I don't know. I was guilty of forgetting about the planner. I know it was a hard thing to get students to do, but I love putting the responsibility for becoming an organized human being on students, because that's what we all have to do as adults. And if I didn't have a digital calendar that would ping at me to remind me to be places, I probably wouldn't be here right now. This is just the reality of our modern life. So I like the fact that we can integrate that with a calendar that's flexible and easily accessed by students in a way that works for them.
And I really liked the calendar integration. When my child was younger in middle school, she struggled with that paper planner that many schools require and have to be signed by a teacher. And this was her paper planner. It was her digital option. And so when she'd get in the car, I'd ask her homework and she could just pull it up on her calendar on her phone. And it really helped her gain independence, because what do we do as adults? I have a paper planner, but I also have it on my phone for when I'm out and running around. So it was one step to get them more independent.
We use the tool that works, and I'm always happy to engage students in metacognition, thinking about their own thinking, knowing what works for them. And when we think in terms of equity and accessibility and universal design, if we can remove a barrier for a student, so if I have the student that just cannot, even with the paper planner, maybe that student will do just fine with the digital calendar. So if we can remove that barrier, that's a really great thing to be able to do. Any other commentary on the calendar before I go forward? So the gradebook in Google Classroom has been a constantly evolving entity, and, and it's pretty full-featured now. It has a gradebook. The assignments that you put into Google Classroom will show up here, and you can grade them. Students will receive the feedback that you give, whether it's just a score or whether there's a comment. They can comment back to you. Students can unsubmit and resubmit, so you can work towards mastery. And you can keep track of all of your classwork in one place. As far as exporting your gradebook and having it connect to your SIS, whether it's Skyward or whatever you're using, that is not a super smooth process at the moment for gradebook. It's, I believe, in beta, and it's a little bit of an unwieldy process right now, but we do know that Google has heard us, our collective screams for help as educators to get that straightened out. One of the good things to know about Google Classroom is that they've been pretty responsive to feedback requests over the years, and there is a built-in tool on every page in Classroom that you can click and give them feedback with a screenshot of what you want. And they have been remarkably responsive to that over the years. So I have hope that this will become an easier process as we go. Does anyone else have more experience with Gradebook that they want to pop in? Because I have not graded students in it in a while.
I have avoided using Gradebook for grading students in that I have to open up my Skyward anyways and put the assignments in. So I think of this more as the same process that I had before when I had a paper gradebook and I was entering my grades into Skyward once a week or once every couple days. And having the in Google Classroom where students and parents can see it, and then that transfer over what needs to go into the gradebook, because not everything in my Google Classroom gradebook is going to transfer over to Skyward or another SSI. It's sometimes just a marker for me that, hey, this is where we were on this assignment as we built up towards mastery. But I do agree with you. I am so pleased with the response from Google Classroom. When you hit that question button and give a suggestion, they come back quickly. It feels like most times it comes back within months and it's right there. And so please give the feedback. They're the only company that I have seen read those.
Yeah, they actually do read it. And to be clear, within months is really fast for a turnaround on a software change, in case you're not aware of how long those things usually take. So I mentioned notifications briefly before, and again, with the evolution of Google Classroom, several of us remember a time when your notifications were on or off, and you either got 1,000 emails or 0 emails, and it is not like that anymore. You have some pretty granular controls. You can choose whether you want to receive comments on certain types of responses. Do I want a notification, like an email when someone comments on a post? Or do I want an email when someone has made a private comment. Or I can also decide whether I want notifications for a whole class. So if I just don't need any notifications from first period biology, I can switch that off. And that makes a difference in my email mess that is happening. I believe you can also opt into, I think you can get desktop notifications if you're in classroom and the stream is updated, the student will see that something new has been posted and they need to refresh. There are also different notification settings. If you're accessing with a mobile device, you can receive push notifications, I believe in certain cases, but again, it's very device dependent if your students are using it that way.
Another notification comment I just want to make sure that we add is we recommended earlier to add you to multiple classes. So let's say you're joined into a colleague's class. Well, you may not want to see notifications from their students because you're not grading their students, etc., but you just want to be able to work together. So down at the very bottom, there's that class notifications. You can actually turn off notifications for individual classes that you're a teacher, that you're a part of, and just see the ones that you're directly working with. So you can still be a teacher, but have notifications turned off for the other ones. That way you're not overwhelmed with notifications from, let's say you're part of 10 different classes. So you can just have your notifications turned on.
Yeah, it's really nice to have those choices. And as an instructional coach, there have been times when I have been a co-teacher in 10 different classes, and I did not want those notifications. I just needed to be able to drop in and see how things were going. So it's nice.
One of the things in the comments is can teachers do notifications for students?
Like, can they choose what notifications to turn on or off? Not that I know of. The last time I looked at the settings for this in the Google Admin Console, that was not an option to force notifications on. So this is one of those, we have to set expectations and manage our classroom. And I think it's really good to have a specific and explicit conversation about that with your students. I expect you to check every morning by 9 a.m. to see if you have a new assignment or whatever it is going to work for your schedule. Something that you as a teacher have to kind of figure out for yourself.
There was another question. Can you select specific students for notifications? The answer, I'm assuming, to the question is, if you share a post on the stream, you can select individual students that just that share goes to, which will give only those students a notification. Same thing with creating an assignment. If an assignment is only for certain students, they will be the only ones that receive that notification. So,
but if they've turned off their notifications to send it to their email, they won't get it unless they go into Google Classroom. You can email students within Google Classroom. It's a very simple thing. It creates a email group for you, and it uses best practice, BBC, so that they're not seeing everybody else's. One of the things that some teachers have been a little hesitant about is that students see each other's emails within Google Classroom. They're Google emails. However, they can figure that out very simply because everyone in my agency is first name dot last name at our agency email. So even though that kind of freaks some people out, students can figure that out pretty easily. And if you have email turned off for those students, they can't receive email or even send email to the other students in that class.
Yeah, there are a lot of options within the whole kind of Google ecosystem and this is why we ask you to make sure you bring your IT folks in, because there are certain things that they will be able to do to help you manage this workflow that teachers cannot do on their own. Just a quick note, we kind of have talked about this too, but there are desktop and mobile options for Google Classroom. You can access it from Chromebooks, from laptops, from PC or Mac. You can access it from iOS or Android devices, an iPad, a phone, anything that your students have, they can access Google Classroom. Options are a little different. There are some different options in the mobile version, but many districts have had success using Google Classroom with mixed devices. So if you're a district that has iPads up to a certain grade level and Chromebooks beyond, don't worry about that. If you want to use Google Classroom across the whole spectrum, it will work. And it's a nice interface in the phone. That little picture there is just exactly what it looks like in my Google Classroom when I pull it up on my phone. It's very similar to the desktop, so it's a nice unified experience, even if students or teachers use more than one device. Yes, Ms.
If they
Christine.
are using the mobile device, though, you will need to have them download Google Drive, Google Docs, any of the Google products that you want them to use in addition to Classroom. Classroom is its own app and it lets them get into it. But if they wanted to create a Google Doc, they will need to have a Google Doc application installed on that device as well. It can be done because there's lots of conversation in the chat about shared iPads. It can be done in a shared iPad situation, but it's not ideal. And there is some training that needs to happen for students so that they know how to log in and out of Google Classroom and all the other apps, but it can be done. I think in a distance learning, we're not going to have to worry about that too much, as parents will have to have more information on how to switch back and forth, and we will be helping with that as well.
Thank you. So when we're speaking of the parent and the family, one of the things that a lot of us experienced with distance learning 1.0, if we can call it that, the panic version, when we had to all turn on a dime and do this, is that it was difficult to get our families kind of engaged properly. A lot of people were overwhelmed. Parents didn't know what was happening. They were freaked out. And it just depended on where you were, what tools you were using. But I know as a parent, I experienced even a little of that, even though this is kind of my thing. There was still a lot coming at us. So to have a simplified interface that helps your parents be engaged is really important. Google has a very, very simple interface. Guardians can be designated to receive email summaries of student work once a week. So it's not a proactive thing, it's kind of a retroactive thing. And the summary looks kind of like the screenshot you're seeing here. It just says what's missing from last week, what's due next week. It doesn't give them a lot of access to see the actual attachments to the assignments or any of that. It just kind of gives them a little bit of a connection. The guardians that receive the information for each student can be added by individual teachers or by IT on the back end, depending on how you choose to do it. And I believe each student can have up to 20 guardians, so there's no problem with designating more than one household worth of guardians for a student, depending on their family situation, or if they have other caregivers that need to be involved in seeing what is going on with their education. Anything to add there?
The only thing that I would add is being extremely cautious with having parents log in as their student. So when parents log in as their student, they see all of their classmates. They see all of their classmates' comments if you allow students to comment on the stream. So be very aware of privacy laws as you allow parents to log in as students. There was a question, and we'll get back to it later, something about the active Meet link within Google Classroom and how to keep students from starting that meeting and closing that meeting. It's very simple. There's an extension called Waiting Room that can be pushed out to all the students, and therefore they can't access the live Google Meet link until the teacher has opened it up and let them in. That was something we learned during the crazy chaos of COVID in March.
The hard way, yeah.
And actually, there was a recent update from what I've learned, is that if they use the Meet link within Google Classroom, it actually will not open up anymore unless the teacher is in the room.
Yes, they just updated that.
They just updated. So the waiting room extension is great, but not always needed now that the update is there if they use that special link within Google Classroom for Meet.
And I'm going to go ahead and answer the question about the parent signing in as the student. Yeah, you won't actually know if you give your parents that access. So as a teacher, you need to be very aware that parents may be accessing this as a student. And so you may be considering, do I make comments on my stream? Because what will the students be saying? And it's identifiable by the student's name. So you need to think through that as a teacher. Is this appropriate or not appropriate? Should I do this as a Google Classroom or as an assignment that isn't on the wall instead of a post? You need to think through those processes because there are some privacy concerns with parents logging in as their children.
And again, this is one of those kind of top level decisions that you as decision makers will want to think through as you set up, even if you've already chosen Google Classroom as your LMS, the way it's set up and the way you instruct your teachers to use it is going to be different based on those considerations. So there's a lot of other kind of stuff to think about here. And one of the things that we can't go deeply into any of these considerations. They're so individualized per each district that we would not want to give you a recommendation because it's just not our place to do that. But things that we would ask people to consider or think about when they're choosing an LMS and choosing how to implement it. Data privacy. All of our LMSs have a privacy agreement. They all have their level of compliance with FERPA. You have to think about how it interacts with your other digital tools and anything that you're retaining for purposes of public information requests. So again, having maybe IT, maybe your legal folks on board when you think about these things, there are a lot of kind of tendrils out into these other areas that we need to keep in mind. Pricing. We're going to talk just really briefly about that here, but pricing does vary among all of the LMSs that we are talking about. So it's something to think about. Integration of your student information system. Again, we've touched on this. We have talked about how this interacts with Skyward. Every LMS kind of has a different way of interacting with Skyward or with whatever SIS you're using. So think about that. Think about your onboarding and how you're going to get users into the system, what level of IT support you're going to need, and how it integrates with other tools. So we're going to go really quickly through all of these, and I know that I want to leave a little bit of time for some questions, but I just want to have a couple of comments on some of these for you. Like I said, beta testing is in progress for the Skyward and Cumulative. I guess it's cumulative. I guess it's also in beta for Cumulative, and I'm not 100% sure on that one. Maybe some of you know more than I do, but it's not out yet. So again, make sure you involve your IT folks on that. For Google Classroom, you're going to need to have a domain administrator for G Suite, which if you already are using Google, you have one. Someone is running your back end of your Google domain. And you need to make sure that you have the right person and have the right people involved in that process and that they know what they're getting into. If you're already running a Google domain, in my experience as a Google administrator, adding Classroom is not a big lift, although there are some additional tasks that may have to be designated in your IT staff. One of the things to think about when you're onboarding users to Google Classroom is this is something that's already pretty widely used by students and teachers. So if you have experienced G Suite users, they don't need as much training. It's again, not a very high lift. If people have never touched the Google stuff, they're going to have more questions, but it's usually a pretty quick learning curve to add Google Classroom if you already have Google Suite in use. It's pretty intuitive to use. One of the other advantages we've noticed is that a lot of families have experienced the Google tools either at work or at home in their personal life, so it looks familiar, it feels a little less scary. And Google has a lot of online support for the tools, and it's easy, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's some stuff that you can share with them.
I'm going to just interrupt with a comment that I'm seeing in the chat. Privacy. Are we talking student privacy, parent district, concerns of Google mining? Google has signed the education document that says they do not data mine any Google Apps for Education accounts. Now, if you are using Gmail and not a domain within your district, that is completely different. But Google Apps for Education accounts, or G Suite for Education accounts, are completely private and meet the different outlines that they signed in that education agreement, such as Apple and everyone else signed.
Yeah, that's definitely a something that you need to address with your own legal staff. Those are interpreted so much differently that I'm not even going to dip a toe in there, but I will say that they have signed the internet, or the whatever the agreement is, and I can't remember the name of it right now either. But yeah, that they do not actually use the data in the student or in the education domains for that. Let's see. Pricing, again, just a very brief touching on this because there's always exceptions, but Google Classroom is included in your G Suite for Education agreement. If you have a G Suite for Education domain already, you can just flip a switch, turn it on, it's there. There is an additional cost layer if you want to subscribe to it as a district that's called G Suite for Education Enterprise, and that costs money. But it adds a few features to Google Classroom and to some other aspects of your Google domain. So that is something you can look into. But the basic G Suite that most of us started out with does have Classroom included. Thinking about integration with other tools, there are, all of your teachers have been using these other tools, and sometimes in a district we want to kind of get a handle on that and understand what they're using and maybe rein it in a bit, but they're out there, they're using them. We want to facilitate everything good that our teachers are doing. So many third-party websites that offer educational tools have integrations with Google Classroom, and that's the ability to directly add assignments, from the app and so forth. So there are a lot of ways that you can have those tools interact. We always caution people to, again, involve IT, involve legal, check end user agreements, check privacy agreements before you integrate them, because some of them have been historically not so great on that, and some of them have got the idea and are now fine. So it's just something to keep in mind. There is a link on this slide, and when we post the slide deck later, you'll be able to click on that, and that actually is a list of apps that are integrated with Google Classroom. Christy, did you have something? I'm sorry.
I did. So one of the things also with the integration tools is that your IT team, or whoever is running your Google domain, can push out apps to students so that none of the students are installing apps at all, nor do they have permission to install apps. The district is pushing out the apps that work. Now, when they push out the apps, they need to be within a computer system. So these apps don't always work on an iPad or a tablet with the IT person pushing it out. Those would have to be dealt with differently. But we do not allow in many districts students to install their own applications, these third party, for the exact reasons Catherine was talking about. Somebody needs to vet them. Somebody needs to make sure that they're good. And we do it that direction instead of students going out to the wild, wild webs.
Yeah, that actually happens very often with extensions that are useful in Chrome that will have people pushing them out. And there are lots of those that interact with Classroom as well. So it's my turn to stop talking and start listening if there are any questions. We're at 9:55, so I know we want to honor everybody's time. Are there any questions in the chat that have come up that we have not yet addressed?
I just answered the one about guardians who do not accept their login. It is up to the guardians to choose if they want to accept or not accept. We cannot push them or force them to read that email that gives them, the breakdown of the week or the day. That's going to be up to them. Just like in the physical classroom, we could send home flyers all we want, and a parent or guardian can choose to read them or not. Same thing, we can't force them.
And I wanted to address Kathleen as well. If it's not activated, it's something you do in the administrative console. So your IT folks should be able to find it under settings for classroom. There is a way for them to turn on Guardian reports and also determine whether teachers can add guardians or not, or whether it's a central thing.
So I also saw Paul had a question about what are the ESD resources for districts who are trying to onboard this, especially with the SSI integration. I know our local ESDs are all going to be doing trainings for onboarding teachers. However, the SSI integration is a different level and would require your IT team to possibly contract with your IT team at an ESD to get that all set up. That's not a teacher level thing.
No, and one of the things we'll mention here at the end is that those contacts that we showed you at the beginning, each region has their own contacts for distance learning. We're trying to kind of be a clearinghouse and a resource for you. So if you have a question about how to get this going in your district, you would contact the coordinator from your region. It might be that they can help you specifically, or it might be that they can't help you, but they're going to know someone who can, and they're going to help kind of connect you with the right person. That is our intent, is to help you find the right resources. And the list I see in the chat now that John was asking, is there a list? The list was on the first slide we showed you. And when, if you are able to go to the website, and we'll send a follow-up email that contains this information to all of you who attended, you will have a list so that you can access who is your representative for each region. And Lori, no, you do not have to have a Gmail account to receive a Guardian email. Whatever email you use is what is put into the system, and you receive it there. Any other questions?
They get 1 minute early. Perfect timing. I always to end early.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all of you for joining us. I hope that was useful. And again, we have recorded this. We will get this information up, and we will send a follow-up to everyone so you're able to access the information later. And I hope you will join us for some of the other sessions today. I think the next one, what is our next one? You guys have already forgotten. Teams is coming up at 10:15. And if you haven't registered for that, you can visit that professional learning page and get signed up. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. And Andrew.